Loneliness is not just an emotion. It is a void that gnaws at the human spirit, a constant reminder of our fragility as social creatures. And it is within this void that the seeds of cult influence take root. Imagine a person drifting through life, feeling unseen, unheard, and unanchored, carrying a quiet ache that no one else seems to notice, yet it becomes the lens through which they interpret every encounter. For many, this ache is unbearable, and when someone appears with a smile that feels genuine, with words that sound like they were tailored for their hidden wounds, the defenses crumble almost instantly. The hunger for belonging is not rational. It is primal, coded deep within our biology, older than language itself, and in the hands of those who understand dark psychology, it becomes the perfect entry point. Cults do not recruit with doctrine or philosophy. They recruit with comfort, with the illusion of home, with the promise of finally being part of something that will erase the ache of isolation. When people are starved of connection, they stop evaluating the quality of the food offered to them, and they will feast on poison if it comes wrapped in warmth. The first gathering might feel harmless, a shared meal, a circle of faces that welcome without judgment, a place where secrets can be spoken without fear, and in that moment, the void within feels filled for the first time in years. The danger is subtle because it does not appear as danger. It appears as relief, and relief is intoxicating. Once the hunger begins to ease, gratitude attaches itself to the group and to its leader, and this gratitude is the first chain, invisible yet unbreakable, because it convinces the soul that without this group, without this family, the void will return, and the loneliness will devour them whole again. But belonging is never given freely in the world of cults. It is traded, slowly and silently, for pieces of the self. Once the hunger has been temporarily fed, the leader and the group begin to raise the stakes, asking for small sacrifices that do not seem dangerous at first glance, but carry enormous weight over time. A person who once had their own opinions learns to soften them to fit the harmony of the group, and soon after, they begin to censor their doubts, because doubt feels like betrayal when everyone else seems so certain. This subtle shift is intoxicating. To be part of something larger than oneself, to feel the warmth of collective identity, is like being wrapped in a blanket after years of shivering. Yet beneath the comfort lies a quiet corrosion, because the very hunger that drove them to seek belonging is now being weaponized. The cult offers acceptance, but it is conditional acceptance, based on loyalty, on obedience, on the willingness to reshape one's thoughts to align with the doctrine. And because the memory of loneliness still haunts the heart, members convince themselves that the trade is worth it. After all, what is a little conformity compared to the abyss of isolation? Slowly, the hunger that once made them desperate becomes the leash that holds them captive, because they fear losing the one place that made them feel whole. The leader understands this dynamic perfectly and nurtures it, alternating between kindness and subtle reminders of what exile would mean, a return to emptiness, a return to invisibility, a return to the cold silence of being no one. The cult thrives not because it creates belonging, but because it convinces its members that belonging cannot exist anywhere else, that outside the circle there is nothing but the void waiting to swallow them. The most dangerous illusion of belonging inside a cult is that it convinces a person that they have finally found something eternal, something indestructible, when in reality it is as fragile as glass and as conditional as a contract signed in blood. In the beginning, the group feels like sanctuary, a fortress against the cold indifference of the outside world. But over time, this sanctuary begins to reveal its price. Every smile, every embrace, every word of validation is no longer a simple gesture of love or friendship, but a reward tied directly to loyalty. Members soon learn that to question is to risk exile, and to risk exile is to face the one fear that brought them here in the first place, the return of unbearable loneliness. This is the cruel paradox. The more they cling to the group for comfort, the less they are able to survive without it. And the less they are able to survive without it, the more power the cult has over their soul. It is not the doctrine that enslaves them, but the memory of pain, the echo of empty nights, the sense of being unseen in a vast, uncaring world. And the leader knows how to keep that memory alive like a wound that never heals. They remind their followers, in subtle whispers or direct warnings, that outside these walls no one will love them, no one will understand them, no one will accept the person they truly are. The longer one stays, the more the boundaries between genuine affection and manipulative conditioning blur, until even the warmth of belonging feels poisoned. Yet people cling to it, because poison warmth is still warmer than the cold void of isolation. In this way, the cult transforms the hunger for belonging into chains stronger than iron, for it is not metal that holds them, but fear, not threats that bind them, but the terror of returning to emptiness. Control does not begin with chains or cages. It begins with a voice that knows how to slip past the defenses of the human mind, a voice that radiates certainty in a world drowning in uncertainty. The figure at the center of a cult is rarely introduced as a tyrant. Instead, they appear as the embodiment of clarity, a person who seems untouched by the confusion that afflicts ordinary lives. Their charisma is not just charm. It is weaponized certainty, the ability to speak with conviction so strong that it silences doubt before it even forms. People who have lived their lives in hesitation, in second-guessing, in endless circles of self-doubt, suddenly feel like they are in the presence of someone who has no hesitation at all, and that contrast is magnetic. Charisma is the invisible thread that binds the lonely, the uncertain, and the desperate into the orbit of the leader, and once inside that orbit, they mistake their awe for truth. It is not what the leader says that matters most, but how they say it. The rhythm, the timing, the gaze that makes you feel like you are the only soul in the room. Followers do not surrender to arguments. They surrender to presence, to the feeling of standing before someone who seems to hold the answers they never knew how to ask. This is how the trap begins, not with ideology, but with intoxication, the spell of a personality so powerful that reality itself bends around it. And in that bending, people do not see chains being forged. They see a doorway to freedom, a guide who promises to lead them away from the chaos of their lives into something higher, purer, more meaningful. But this promise is not a gift. It is the bait. The certainty that dazzles them is only a mask, and behind it lies the machinery of control, waiting to consume those who mistake charisma for truth. The magnetism of a charismatic leader is not merely performance. It is a calculated psychological weapon designed to disarm critical thought. To those already weakened by loneliness, uncertainty, or unfulfilled longing, the leader presents themselves as a living answer, a symbol of what life could be if only they submit. Their words are carefully chosen not to inform, but to resonate emotionally, bypassing rational filters that would normally question contradictions or exaggerations. Each speech, each story, Each anecdote is layered with subtle cues, pauses that allow emotion to swell, gestures that reinforce authority, tones of compassion that make vulnerability seem safe. To the untrained ear, this feels like authenticity, but it is stagecraft at the highest level, rehearsed until it seems effortless, polished until it feels divine. The followers begin to interpret this aura as evidence of wisdom or even supernatural favor, convincing themselves that no ordinary person could command such presence. And in this reverence, they slowly surrender their autonomy, internalizing the idea that questioning the leader is not merely an intellectual act, but an act of betrayal. Charisma thrives in environments where doubt has been starved, where people crave not facts but reassurance. And once the leader becomes the source of that reassurance, every word they speak becomes law, even when it contradicts the very reality in front of their followers' eyes. It is not logic that binds people to cults, but the intoxicating relief of having someone else think for them. Someone else take the unbearable weight of choice and replace it with certainty. This is why the trap is so effective, because to those caught within it, surrender does not feel like loss, it feels like salvation. They do not realize that the comfort they feel is not freedom, but the tightening of invisible strings pulling them deeper into dependence. What makes the charisma trap especially dangerous is that it feeds on a universal weakness, the human tendency to confuse confidence with truth. Throughout history, voices that spoke with absolute certainty have been elevated above voices that offered nuance, complexity, or humility. The cult leader exploits this bias perfectly, radiating an image of unshakable clarity while carefully concealing the fragility of their own humanity. To the follower, this confidence feels like light breaking through darkness, a beacon that gives direction to those who have wandered aimlessly. Yet the light is artificial, fueled not by genuine wisdom, but by manipulation, by psychological mastery of how to mirror desires and fears back to an audience until they believe the leader sees directly into their soul. This is the heart of the trap. Followers mistake recognition for revelation, believing they are understood on a level no one else has ever reached, when in reality their vulnerabilities have been studied, exploited, and reflected back at them. Once this illusion takes hold, the leader no longer needs to argue or persuade. Their very presence becomes enough to silence resistance. In that silence, the follower begins to rewrite their own story, aligning their identity with the leader's vision, reshaping their values to match the narrative that has been gifted to them. By the time cracks appear, moments of doubt, glimpses of contradiction, the charisma has already bound them so tightly that they interpret even manipulation as care, even exploitation as sacrifice. They convince themselves that the flaws of the leader are tests of faith, that obedience is the path to truth, and in doing so they seal their own cage. The charisma trap is not about charm. It is about control hidden in plain sight, about the transformation of human longing for certainty into a leash that drags the soul deeper into captivity. No cage is more effective than the one you cannot see, and no prison more binding than the one you willingly enter. Cults understand this better than anyone. The surest way to gain control over a person is not through violence, not through threats, but through separation. The isolation ritual is never announced openly. It unfolds gradually, like a slow tightening of the walls, until one day the follower looks around and realizes that every bridge to the outside world has been quietly dismantled. At first, it begins with subtle suggestions, that friends do not understand, that family is a distraction, that outsiders carry energies or influences that will corrupt the purity of the group. These ideas seem harmless in the beginning, even wise, because they appeal to the universal desire for clarity and focus. But beneath the surface, these teachings are deliberate seeds planted to erode outside connections, ensuring that the only voices that matter are the ones inside the circle. The leader frames the group as a sacred family, the only place where truth resides, and in doing so, they recast everyone else, parents, siblings, lovers, lifelong friends, as obstacles, enemies, or even demons. Slowly, members begin to withdraw from the outside, not because they are forced, but because they are made to believe that leaving behind their old ties is proof of growth, proof of loyalty, proof of enlightenment. The process feels like liberation, but in reality, it is confinement disguised as choice. Once the circle is complete, the follower is surrounded only by people who echo the same beliefs, repeat the same mantras, and reinforce the same worldview, until reality itself is reshaped. And within this sealed environment, doubt cannot survive, because doubt requires comparison, and comparison requires outside perspectives. The isolation ritual removes those perspectives, leaving only the endless mirror of the group, a mirror that reflects not truth, but control. Once separation has begun, the isolation ritual deepens into something far more insidious than mere physical distance. It becomes a psychological barrier, an invisible wall built inside the mind of the follower, one that convinces them that the outside world is not only irrelevant, but actively hostile. The leader nurtures this belief with carefully chosen stories, warnings of betrayal, and examples of former members who fell when they returned to their old lives. In the eyes of the group, leaving is no longer just leaving. It is a descent, a collapse into darkness, a rejection of truth itself. This transforms the external world into a threat and the cult into a refuge, even if the refuge is built upon chains. To reinforce this, the cult deploys rituals that monopolize time and energy, long gatherings, endless chants, repetitive prayers, and constant communal tasks that consume every waking hour. What once were ordinary bonds, dinners with family, conversations with friends, quiet solitude, become impossible luxuries, replaced by the ceaseless hum of the collective. The individual is not left with the space to question, because questioning requires silence, and silence has been stolen. The rhythm of the cult becomes the rhythm of life, until the follower forgets what it felt like to exist without constant reinforcement. At this stage, even physical distance is unnecessary, because the internal barrier is complete. The follower could stand in the presence of their old friends, even their own mother, and yet feel a gulf so vast that no words can cross it. They are not simply cut off. They are conditioned to perceive every attempt at reconnection as a threat, every invitation to return as an attack against their true family. This is the genius of the isolation ritual. It convinces the captive to guard their own cage, to see rescue as danger, and to mistake abandonment for love. The final stage of the isolation ritual is not the removal of the outside world, but the erasure of the memory of belonging anywhere else. At this point, the follower's entire identity has been rewoven into the fabric of the group, and their sense of home, self, and purpose is inseparable from the cult structure. Memories of childhood, friendships, and past dreams are either reframed as illusions or demonized as traps, leaving no anchor outside the circle. The cult becomes the air they breathe, the ground beneath their feet, the only lens through which reality can be interpreted. And here lies the darkest truth. Isolation does not just strip away the old world, it creates a dependency so deep that the thought of leaving feels like annihilation. To walk away is not simply to lose a group. It is to lose oneself, to step into an abyss where no identity remains. Fear of this abyss keeps the follower tethered more tightly than any physical restraint, for it convinces them that captivity is safety and freedom is death. In this way, the ritual of isolation achieves what no physical prison could. A captive who believes escape is impossible, not because of guards or walls, but because their own mind refuses it. And from this position, control becomes absolute. Every doubt is silenced by the echo of the group. Every hesitation is corrected by the leader's authority, and every flicker of independence is drowned by the terror of abandonment. What began as a hunger for belonging has now been inverted into a terror of exile, and this terror ensures obedience more effectively than any whip or threat could. It is not the chains on the wrists that enslave, but the chains around the heart, forged from loneliness, gratitude, and fear, until the prisoner guards their own captivity. Freedom is spoken of as if it is the highest good, the crown jewel of human existence. But the reality is far more unsettling. Most people do not crave freedom as much as they crave safety, certainty, and structure. Freedom is a burden as much as it is a gift, for to be free means to carry the unbearable weight of choice, responsibility, and consequence without anyone to shield you from yourself. The cult leader knows this and does not present freedom as liberation, but as terror. They whisper, sometimes subtly and sometimes with force, that outside the group there is chaos, loneliness, corruption, and failure, while inside the group there is order, family, direction, and clarity. For those already weakened by doubt, this message lands like a revelation. Freedom is not salvation, it is danger. The paradox is devastating. The follower believes they have chosen safety, but what they have really chosen is dependency disguised as protection. And once the follower accepts this trade, the cult has won, because every instinct to leave will be crushed by the terror of facing the world without the leader's guidance. Freedom is not rejected openly. It is reframed as abandonment, as exile, as suicide of the soul. The follower internalizes this lesson until even imagining independence feels like standing on the edge of a cliff with no ground below. Cult psychology thrives in this space, turning the natural human desire for structure into a prison where the bars are invisible and the locks are in the mind. The individual begins to fear the very thing they once thought they sought, the ability to live according to their own will, because the cult has convinced them that their own will is weak, corrupted, unreliable, and doomed to fail. In this way, the fear of freedom becomes stronger than the desire for it, and it chains the follower more securely than any physical restraint ever could. To understand why freedom is so terrifying, one must first understand how fragile human beings often feel when confronted with the vastness of possibility. Every choice carries with it uncertainty, and uncertainty is a breeding ground for fear. In ordinary life, this fear is softened by the structures of society, by family traditions, by cultural norms that narrow the range of choices so that existence feels more manageable. But when those supports crumble, when someone feels rootless, abandoned, or insignificant, freedom suddenly transforms into a crushing void. In this void, the cult offers something that feels like rescue, a narrowing of options, a simplification of existence, a system where the follower no longer has to wrestle with impossible decisions. The leader, cloaked in the aura of certainty, takes on the role of the one who knows, the one who decides, the one who carries the unbearable weight of freedom on behalf of their followers. And here lies the heart of the manipulation. By surrendering freedom, the follower feels relieved rather than enslaved. They convince themselves that life is easier this way, that it is better to obey than to risk error, better to follow than to stumble blindly on their own. Every ritual, every rule, every repetition of doctrine is not experienced as restriction, but as comfort, a protective shell that shields them from the chaos of open possibility. And once this comfort settles in, the idea of leaving becomes unthinkable, because leaving means re-entering the storm of freedom, where failure, rejection, and despair await. The cult cleverly reinforces this by presenting horror stories of outsiders, tales of people who left and lost everything, who fell into addiction, madness, or despair because they tried to live without guidance. The fear of freedom does not only paralyze, it reshapes identity itself. Over time, the follower forgets that they ever lived without the group's rules, without the leader's voice, without the constant reinforcement of belonging and certainty. They begin to measure their own worth not by their individuality, but by their compliance, not by their choices, but by their obedience. In this inverted reality, submission becomes strength, and independence becomes weakness. The leader reinforces this illusion by portraying themselves as the shield against chaos, the guardian who protects fragile souls from the unbearable responsibility of freedom. To question the leader, therefore, is not merely rebellion. It is self-destruction, because the follower has been taught that without this guidance, they will collapse into nothingness. This psychological inversion is the final victory of the cult, the transformation of fear into loyalty. What began as longing for direction becomes a terror of living without it. And so the follower clings tighter with every passing day, mistaking their dependency for devotion. This is why escape becomes so rare. Even when cracks in the facade appear, even when doubts gnaw at the heart, the thought of facing life without the cult feels like drowning in an endless sea with no land in sight. And the cruel irony is that the very freedom they once possessed, the freedom they surrendered, is still there, waiting, but now it feels monstrous, unbearable, deadly. The leader has not destroyed their freedom. They have corrupted the perception of it, turning it from a birthright into a nightmare. In this way, the cult does not imprison the body, it imprisons the will. The follower may live in the same world as everyone else, under the same sky, breathing the same air, but internally they inhabit a cage constructed from fear of themselves, fear of failure, fear of choice. The most devastating force within a cult is not the leader's commands, nor the rituals, nor even the manipulation of fear and loyalty. It is the gradual erosion of the self, the slow unmaking of the individual until the person no longer remembers who they were before they entered the circle of influence. At first, the process feels subtle, almost invisible, like water wearing away stone. The leader never demands immediate surrender. Instead, they chip away at identity piece by piece. A name might be replaced with a new one, a symbolic act meant to show rebirth, but in truth designed to sever ties with the past. Memories are rewritten through group retellings, until personal history becomes blurred, reshaped, or dismissed as meaningless compared to the collective narrative. Doubts are reframed as sins, independent thoughts as signs of weakness, and soon even the inner voice that once belonged to the follower feels alien. They begin to hear the leader's tone echoing in their own mind, correcting them, guiding them, silencing them. What was once their private sanctuary of thought becomes occupied territory. This invasion does not happen violently. It feels natural, even comforting, because it is framed as growth, as purification, as becoming something higher. But in reality, it is annihilation. The unique constellation of memories, dreams, and instincts that once formed a human being is ground down into dust, replaced with a mask that reflects only what the group demands. This mask smiles when told, weeps when instructed, and praises without hesitation. But behind it there is emptiness, a hollowing that grows deeper with every ritual repeated, every confession forced, every sacrifice made in the name of loyalty. To the outsider, the follower may look alive, may walk and speak and work, but inside, the erosion is complete. The self has been dissolved into a role, and the role belongs not to them, but to the cult. The erosion of self is rarely experienced as destruction at first. For many, it feels like relief, as though the heavy weight of individuality has finally been lifted. The burden of choice, of doubt, of wrestling with identity in a chaotic world is replaced by a ready-made structure. The cult presents this as liberation. Here, you no longer need to question who you are, because we tell you. Here, you no longer need to agonize over right and wrong, because we decide for you. At first, the follower mistakes this for clarity, a sharpening of purpose, but in truth it is the beginning of amnesia. Each act of surrender, however small, is a thread cut from the fabric of personal being. The clothes you wear, the way you speak, the people you see, all are slowly exchanged for choices the group has made in advance. What you once liked becomes trivial, what you once believed becomes childish, and soon even your deepest emotions are reclassified. Love must be directed toward the leader, devotion toward the group, suspicion toward outsiders. This restructuring penetrates so deeply that it alters how the follower perceives themselves in silence, in the moments before sleep, in the reflections of the mirror. The voice whispering inside is no longer their own. It is a voice borrowed, trained, and implanted, repeating doctrines instead of desires. Over time, this disconnection grows unbearable, and so the follower clings harder to the collective, because to leave now would mean facing a terrifying question. Who am I, if not what they have made me? And the truth is, many can no longer answer. Their identity, once fluid and alive, has been drained until nothing remains but the shape the cult has carved. This is not belonging. It is vanishing, and the tragedy lies in how willingly the victim participates in their own disappearance. By the time the erosion of self is complete, the follower no longer requires heavy persuasion. They have become their own enforcer, their own jailer, policing their thoughts and correcting their impulses before anyone else needs to intervene. A glance at the leader is enough to silence a question. A whisper of disapproval from the group is enough to spark guilt and shame so deep it feels unbearable. What was once external control has been internalized, transformed into a reflex, until obedience feels natural and resistance feels sinful. This is the final victory of the cult, when the boundaries of the self dissolve so completely that the victim no longer recognizes the bars of their prison. They may speak of choice, of loyalty, of devotion, But these words have been emptied of meaning, recycled into hollow affirmations designed to maintain the illusion that something of their individuality remains. To outsiders, they may seem robotic, but within the cult, they are praised as faithful, devoted, enlightened. And this praise reinforces the hollowing, convincing them that emptiness is virtue, that silence of the self is proof of strength. In this way, the cycle becomes self-sustaining, because the eroded self has no strength left to rebel, only the capacity to conform. The cruel genius of the cult lies in this transformation. The victim no longer even sees what has been stolen, because the very ability to see has been stripped away. What remains is a shell, animated by doctrines, rituals, and commands, but missing the inner spark that once belonged to a free human being. And the haunting truth is that this shell is not imposed violently, but built gradually, through consent given in small increments, through choices surrendered piece by piece until the person disappears without noticing. In the end, the follower believes they have found themselves, but what they have found is an imitation, a construct designed to serve another's will. Control within a cult is not a single act of dominance, but a system, a machinery built piece by piece, designed to strip power from the many and concentrate it in the hands of the few. It begins with language, for language is the framework of thought. Words are redefined until they no longer mean what they once did. Freedom becomes obedience. Truth becomes whatever the leader declares. Family becomes the group, and love becomes loyalty to the cause. Once the dictionary of the mind has been rewritten, the machinery moves on to behavior. Rituals are repeated endlessly, from chanting to fasting to confessions, until the body itself is programmed to respond on command. What seems like harmless repetition is in fact conditioning, a steady shaping of reflexes so that thinking is no longer required. But the machinery does not stop at language and behavior. It goes deeper, into the architecture of belonging. Followers are cut off from their old networks, isolated from friends and family, and the cult becomes the only mirror in which they see themselves. This isolation ensures that no competing voice remains to challenge the authority of the group. Then, fear is woven into the system. Fear of punishment, fear of exclusion, fear of damnation, fear of the outside world. Each gear of this machinery, language, ritual, isolation, fear, interlocks with the others until the system becomes self-perpetuating. Even when the leader is silent, the machinery runs, powered by the followers themselves, who police each other, correct each other, and confess each other's doubts. The brilliance of this design is that control no longer requires constant enforcement. It has been internalized, like a parasite that convinces its host that serving it is survival itself. And so the machinery hums, silent but relentless, grinding away the remnants of resistance, producing obedience as its final product. The machinery of control grows more insidious when it merges with emotion. It is not enough to redefine words or choreograph behavior. The cult must reach into the most vulnerable parts of the human heart. Guilt is sharpened into a blade, wielded against the follower whenever cracks of doubt appear. If they hesitate, they are told they are weak. If they question, they are told they are betraying the collective. If they dream of leaving, they are told they are condemning themselves to ruin or damnation. In time, the follower learns to preempt punishment by punishing themselves, confessing sins they never committed, apologizing for thoughts they cannot control, policing their desires before anyone else can. This self-surveillance becomes the hidden motor of the machinery, because it ensures obedience continues even when no one is watching. Yet guilt alone is not enough. The system must also offer rewards, flashes of ecstasy that convince the follower that submission is worth the cost. A moment of praise from the leader feels like salvation. A nod of approval feels like divine recognition. The machinery alternates between punishment and reward, fear and relief, until the follower becomes addicted to the cycle, trapped in a loop where suffering is endured in the hope of small moments of belonging. This alternating current of pain and pleasure keeps the machinery running smoothly, because it binds the follower not only with fear of loss, but also with longing for recognition. Every ritual, every act of obedience, becomes another turn of the wheel, another gear sliding into place. Over time, the machinery does not even need the leader to be present. The system runs on momentum, fueled by the emotions of the followers themselves. They are both prisoners and prison guards, slaves and enforcers, caught in a design that convinces them the chains they wear are a crown. What makes the machinery of control nearly unbreakable is its invisibility to those inside it. A machine can be escaped if one sees its walls, but this system disguises itself as truth, as morality, as destiny. The gears of control are hidden behind the illusion of choice. The follower believes they are choosing devotion, choosing discipline, choosing loyalty. They do not see that their options have already been narrowed, that their will has already been reshaped by forces working beneath awareness. In this way, the machinery builds not just obedience but faith in obedience, the belief that to serve is to live. And so the follower resists liberation, clings to the very structure that enslaves them, and fears the silence that would come if the machinery stopped. The brilliance and the cruelty lies in how thoroughly the system rewrites perception. What outsiders see as oppression, the follower sees as clarity. What outsiders see as chains, the follower sees as safety. If they are ever confronted with contradictions, the machinery provides explanations, doctrines polished smooth by repetition, parables designed to dissolve doubt before it can harden. And if doubt grows too loud, the system reacts with ferocity, closing ranks, isolating the questioner, forcing them either to repent or to vanish. Thus, the machinery defends itself, self-corrects, and adapts, ensuring its survival like a living organism. To those outside, it is a structure of manipulation. To those within, it is the very meaning of existence. And so long as the gears turn, the individual cannot imagine life beyond it. This is the essence of control at its darkest. Not chains imposed from without, but chains woven within, accepted, even embraced. In the end, the follower does not see themselves as a victim of machinery, but as a part of it, a gear in the system, convinced that their turning is what keeps the world itself alive.